Hello. Today I'm briefly talking about the new Rio map and basically giving a run through on the positions that each team members might want to take during a fight at each point in the stages, and basically giving a run through on the philosophy behind how you would position on this map. It's actually a super complex and very interesting map, so I look forward to discussing it with you. So the bottom line is this map it demands mobility heroes and it demands some level of long range. There are long enough sightlines on this map and lots of significant high grounds to the point that you really don't have any options if you are unable to close the distance. So right off the bat, we'll start from offense POV. Or actually, we'll start from defense because that way we can build the offense around that. So as defense, this is naturally gonna be the strongest position on the map for you on point A. The reason being because it's very difficult for the offense to close the distance here. See, there's no stairs, no anything. This is the only staircase, and it's behind them, you. So that means they're gonna have to find some way to either have vertical mobility, or like jump on you, or they're gonna have to path around the stairs. So if you play here early on, you can look for some early poke as the offense comes up. And then as soon as they get close with their long range heroes or mobile heroes who might dive you, you can fall back this way. The reason being because this cover is good against poke, but if they jump on you and close the distance, it can become very difficult to kite back safely from this position. See, there's no cover, you're far enough up that it's hard to drop off the back of the bridge, and if you do drop off the back of the bridge, you're actually still exposed to their sight lines. So you can solve this by playing on either side. So on this side, you have the mini, you can kind of monitor this flank, keep it safe, etc. And you have still a very strong sightline here. Not to mention, you can like kind of go down here or even down to here and poke some of the people on the low ground. The other alternative is you can come over to this side, and while it's a slightly more restricted angle than in kind of like standing around the middle, you still get pretty good sightlines down the road, and you get this really strong kite back into the staircase. And if they dive you, rotating here and then having a long range angle here is actually incredibly strong. So what we'll likely see is flex supports and the main support playing around here, or the flex support playing around here, because then they can rotate around this way to kite back. You'll have your tracer or Genji or your flanker playing around here to monitor this health pack and poke out this flank and keep their tracer from coming around this way. Your tank will probably be around here and maybe cross over if necessary or drop down as people try to come close. I don't think they will want to aggressively counter dive here, so you might see tanks like Sigma or maybe Zarya who are like a little more counterplay focused. You might see them a little more on this point. Because like for example Winston, yeah, he can bubble off if their tank engages, but if their backline is over here, if the offense's backline is over here, you don't really have any good angles to set up on it, so you kind of have to let them come into your space a little bit. So you might even see teams play for like kind of having their tank here and their flex support here from the start and kind of set up a kill box around this zone. So the offense is going to have to deal with that. We'll cover that in a little bit, but first I'll go through the other points. As the offense pushes through, you also have the second zone of the map of the point A with the capture point. This sightline is very challenging to deal with. If you have an enemy Widowmaker, Ashe, Hanzo, etc. over here, this is very difficult. Over here, this is pretty difficult, but if you force them out, then they're stuck on this low ground angle, which is considerably less threatening. But I think this staircase is really like, this is a strong one. And if you don't have that, this is your next best kite back, and then drop to here, and you'd kite back to here. So that'd be your long range DPS. Your flex supports would probably be sitting here, and they would kite back this way probably. And then you would position your flanker probably over here to watch this mega, prevent their flankers from coming around. They can rotate through here if necessary, if things get a little hot. They can make some space, but their job is to prevent enemies from coming through this zone and getting up to behind their flex supports. Because we don't care if they come up these stairs. These stairs, yeah, they're good, and they'll put a lot of pressure on us, but we can still rotate down for free and stay pretty safe if we keep that back staircase open. And from there, we would just rotate our back line down to here. And this is also a pretty decent position for the Zen, the Ana, the Brig, etc. Your tank will probably be playing over here underneath them. Unless they're on Sigma, then they might also be playing like over here and just going for some poke. But I think you'd position them across, because from here you can get support from your backline, you can get support from your backline, and the enemy has to touch point to really have any sightlines on you. So you're actually pretty hard to force out, and you can just really easily move out here, contest the little poke at people up here, etc. So it's a pretty strong position. Now for a point A offense. Notably, this going around this way, not so good, because you're exposed to really long sightlines from the bridge. So you probably want to go this way. And now you still have to deal with the long sightlines on the bridge, but what you can do is you can actually cross over to here. If you're like, let's say the Winston or the tank. And then over to here. And you have a really nice angle to engage off a short sightline. Because they can't see me, I can easily like boosters up, jump, etc. Land right here. Shoot them, cause some mayhem, force their team back into these positions. And maybe like get something working. The supports are probably just gonna have to stay in main. And then on that first jump, they would cross over this way. And then they'll probably just play from right here. Because this trolley, even though it's like you can shoot through it on this side, you can pretty easily, like the front of it is pretty good cover. So what you can do is you can use this as your staging ground, because ideally what you have to do is create enough pressure on this high ground to somehow wrap your backline around here and also simultaneously force them off this high ground, which is a big ask, but here's how you do it. So I think Echo is going to be super strong on this first point, and Tracer as well. So what you would do is you would send your dive tank around this way, or maybe even like all the way back if you do ball. So let's say Winston, you'd have your Winston here. You would set up your Echo around here probably. Your Tracer can really easily get to here and kind of just hang out here. And then your backline is also down here, let's say, or even here potentially, but well, no, probably here. So backline is here, tank is over here, Echo is either here or here, and your Tracer is over here. So basically what you do is your tank jumps in, and your Tracer comes in for the pinch, and your Echo comes in from whatever angle, and suddenly you have a 3-part pinch on this high ground. And while I can't guarantee that it would work, it's probably the best chance for breaking open this first point. But this first point, I think we're going to see a lot of full holds on it when it comes into Owl, because it's honestly just really hard to break. And it's probably the worst design section of this map, I would say. But, you know, it is what it is. So it is possible that teams might just be able to out-sustain this, because it's actually super hard to get your flex supports on an angle to, like, do anything here. Unless you're really good at rotating them into the map, but even then it's hard to get them on any sightlines. But if you can manage to set up dives with mobile heroes and set up some map controls to force them off bridge, now you're in the position to start getting some work done. So from here, you can basically ignore this side of the map because this is useless for defense. There's not enough cover. Useless for offense, not enough cover. This is also pretty useless for both because there's not enough cover. So this entire side of the map this does not exist. So what you would do is you're looking at this wide angle away from the payload path, or well, I say payload path, but main. This whole zone, this of rooms and stuff, and the area to the right of it, that is your key zone. So remember, the enemy team is going to have some long-ranged people set up like around here, like their backline, their tank maybe, etc. Maybe someone like here, who then drops to like here. Or no, sorry, tank would be here. Supports would be up here. Long-range deeps would be around here or here. Tracer would be over there. Or maybe down there as well. So then what we are doing is we want our flex support right here. Because this is like, this spot and this spot are like super duper strong sightlines onto the point. Or like maybe a long range DPS could go here too. Very, very useful though. Meanwhile, your tanks and support, or tank and support, are probably actually going to want to wrap around all the way around this way. So actually, scratch that. You're going to have tank, flex support, and tracer come around this way. And you're going to just keep like a hit scan over here. So your hit scan is going to be go over here. They're your like wide, long, keep away from them, look for long sight lines. Like Widow is probably going to be very lethal on this point. Or honestly on this whole map. And the reason you take your whole tank and supports and stuff and want to go around this way is precisely because it limits those sight lines the most, because they can't risk inhabiting that whole area. So that door is really the longest sight line that they can have on this position. So then you have this whole battle of, okay, the enemy team is kind of like hanging out in this room, their tank, so they're going to try and stall you out a little bit. You might try and force point a little here, maybe battle up the staircase. So you have your long-range DPS trying to give you cover, while the rest of the team kind of tries to break things open from over here. And I think that is pretty decisively how it will look throughout the time. And your flanker probably goes around, climbs up there, or goes around this way and tries to push up this staircase. But this staircase is super hard to push up because it's very long and you don't like being indoors as a flanker. And this is also like their flanker should be around here trying to kind of like harass you and prevent you from freely rotating through, or like around here. So they might just chase you out. So we'll have to see. That'll be an interesting counterplay, and I think a lot will depend on how much your hit scan like over here can really make things work and create some openings. Okay, point B. This is probably one of the most interesting points in the game, period. Because it's very short. It goes from just here to here. Like super short. And really all it is this one outer path and then this whole big jumble of inner path. So basically, the defense is going to want to like look for some early poke from this doorway, because this is really hard to access. Maybe some early poke from like around here, using these really long sight lines. And some early poke from around here to just deny people from freely coming up the staircase. So you'd probably put your tank kind of around here on like a Sigma or something like that. You'd probably put something like Ashe or Widow over here. And then your flex support would probably be right here to over here. Because then your tank can really easily just back up indoors to get heals or whatever. And then your flanker is once again always going to be trying to enforce the map control. So what they'll probably be doing is just like playing around over here, because this way they can prevent anyone from like sneaking up and diving their Widow, while also keeping eyes on like any dangerous angles like down there, or like people wrapping around to these stairs, etc. So they might actually just be like the one contesting cart too, the tracers or the Genjis and etc. Like you could just like you could put your tracer like around here, and they could like work around these buildings and really easily contest the cart for a long time in the Widow sight lines. So how do we deal with the first part of point B is this on offense? Well, you might just try to LOS it all, because if you block off Widow sight lines here and kind of like hug the building, tag team, put another person on here, push it a little further, go to here, push it a little further, you can kind of work around a lot of these. And if they're like on range DPS, they won't have any options. Unfortunately, if they're on something like Winston and like Genji, you're putting yourself in a prime position for them to just drop onto you. Think like OW2's A kind of vibes. So instead, what you might want to do is force a fight over here with just like your full team to force out their tank and flex support, because once again, this denies that long angle from their DPS. Force out their core, and then suddenly you have a pretty good angle for a long range player here. Your flex supports have this reverse side of this and now can have a really strong angle here. Your tank can kind of occupy this, or like your flex support's gonna be over here. Tank can like push payload and then jump up when they want to, etc. So basically this whole thing, this whole point is a fight over who can get this room. Because if you have this side, great. This is a huge high ground, very difficult to access, easy cover, incredibly good sight lines. If you're on this side, same case. Very good sight lines, very difficult to access, very easy to kite back from. Whoever controls this room controls this map, this stage of the map. And by extension, whoever controls these staircases. So you're going to have somebody in this room on either team protecting this room, like this zone, this middle zone, and someone over here. And like beyond that, it's free reign. You can send your flankers around this side, though noticeably Tracer, her only option to get to this high ground is to go all the way around through here and up another narrow staircase, which she hates. So someone like Genji might be really strong here as your flanker of choice, or like Echo, because they can go over here and just go over the wall, or they can go up to here, and they have very strong options. Similarly, someone like Echo, she can go up here to poke, she can go over here to poke. She has like way more access to poke angles than most other heroes. Pharah might be really strong actually. So we could see some very interesting stuff. Once you get through this zone, you're down to this piece. And this honestly favors the attackers so much. Like this should just be a really easy cap for attackers. Because if they control this high ground, I mean, the offense just can't use this high ground because it's just too close, too easy to set up dives, and there's not really much cover on it. And so then if you can set up like a long range player here, I mean, the defense just kind of crumbles. They would have to send up like a tank maybe to try and clear that out, while sending out their long ranged player here. And so you'll see like your Widow maybe like over on this zone. But it's super easy for the flanker, once again, to kind of be over here if they climb up the wall or have flanked around. So you'd have your long range player here on defense, you'd have your flex supports around here probably too, or maybe up here. Either is fine. And basically you're just going to be trying to hold on to, like, deny this bridge, because if the offense can use this high ground, it all just crumbles for you. And notably, also this high ground is super strong for them. So if they have like a Hanzo is also going to be busted on this map. Like bonkers broken. Like so good on this stage. or like on the map as a whole. So he could just be up here for free, climb up here, super powerful sightlines, and he can just drop down here, climb back up here. Suddenly there's so much distance created and he's back in support LLS. So there's some interesting play options here. Now this point is probably by far the most interesting design and the most challenging because both of the lanes are really narrow. There's nothing here, nothing here. Then you suddenly have this flank route, but it's very long, so it's not very accessible. Then you come out here, but you're exposed to really long sight lines still, and this only gives access to a very narrow platform around the side. Meanwhile, you have this huge payload path that's very wide. And here's your quote-unquote wide lane, but it's actually also very narrow. So this means that the map is going to have long sight lines and not that friendly to having multiple angles. So you would want like one long-range DPS, a flanker like Tracer or maybe even Reaper or like Genji, Sombra. I think Genji and Tracer are probably the best though. And then you probably want Widowmaker on this point or Hanzo. And then Sigma maybe, but I could also see some dive tanks working. And then something like Honor or Zen. I think it's too long of range for that. So on defense, your main question is, okay, well, why not use this high ground, right? And the answer is that if they have mobility, they can just jump onto you. And if they jump onto you from here, while sending a long-ranged player over to here,
Engaging thrusters.
you just die. You just die. Because you can't kite back. You don't have any cover from that position. And you can't kite back around this really thick piece of cover until you're already dead. So now the answer for defense is, okay, well, how do I hold this position, right? Because that isn't very accessible, and I have sightlines onto it from here. This is clearly the key piece of cover, but I can't just slap my whole team down here because, unfortunately, it's pretty open, and there's not actually that much space here. So now what? So what you'll do is you'll have your tank holding this doorway, right? And they can like drop down here to contest cart if needed, but they really just want to hold this doorway. And then you have your flex support either here, like they might be here, they might be hugging the wall here with Winston, or they might be all the way over here where they still have sightlines, right? All of those are options. And so you have your Winston here, your Tracer, Genji, etc. They are holding this position. The reason why is now that that is blocked off, all they have to do is they can harass anyone who dives to try and set up here. Like they can keep them from accessing their flex support or getting angles from this side of the map. They can harass any flankers who are trying to come up from the bottom. And basically their job is to shut down this side of the map. And then your long range hit scan, or Hanzo, has a couple options. So they will probably look for like some grapple shots maybe on this, or like quick climb shots. But I think you'll see a lot of them kind of playing up here, just like trying to keep this same sight line, because then they can poke over here, they can poke here, and then they can pretty quickly just adapt around to here as the payload progresses, move over. Widow can pretty easily grapple up to here, or Hanzo can climb up to here, rotate around this way, rotate around this way. So the hit scan will basically just be, or I say hit scan, but the long range DPS will basically just be moving around the sides of this map, looking for angles. But they probably will not go further up than like about this doorway, because then suddenly they're exposed to the enemy long range DPS. So I could also see maybe some stuff where like if you have a Hanzo, they could just play over here and just be like repeatedly going up and down looking for some shots. So there's options. Or like here, so yeah, you'll see them kind of surfing around free back here, because it's very hard for flankers and divers to close the distance on them with such a long map stage. So they can play pretty free and solo. So how do we deal with that on offense? Well, number one thing is we gotta get this angle. So you're gonna be sending your team around here, And your hit scan or long range DPS is probably going to be here looking for shots on their flex support, wherever they are, either of these. You'll have your tank trying to come up to here and maybe push through this doorway a little bit, right? Because their tank is going to be blocking it, but you might kind of poke it around, see if you can break it a little bit, pressure them out. The team that does that more effectively wins. They also could come around here to like force point a little bit, but you get pretty opened up to a lot of sightlines, so I don't love that solution. So yeah, you have flex supports over here, your flex supports here, your supports over here, your long range hit scan stacked on top of them because you don't have that many sightlines in this game. They're either, the long range hit scan is here,
Engaging thrusters.
or sometimes over here, because then they might be able to pick off the enemy flex support or a tank from like here. So you'll see them going around this way, this whole back arc. Meanwhile, your tracer or flanker really wants to be looking for control of this staircase, or like climbing up here and battling their flanker right here. And notice that your flex supports over there can still heal your flanker over here. And they're basically ensuring that the flanker over here can't freely come onto their back line. So they're like kind of just holding this angle in check. And then what you can do is from this position where the tanks and stuff are, you can also look for a backline dive here if their backline is here. And while normally that isn't that good because it's only one angle, you can split them from their tank while simultaneously your tracer or whatever can pretty easily just wrap around this way instead, or your flanker, your Genji tracer, they can run around here and be completely behind them. You can give them the little 1-2 if they're if their opposing flanker isn't watching. So now suddenly you have this cool option to like complete 180 them and hit the pinch. So you have really interesting crossfire dynamics here between people here, people here, people here, and people here. Both teams are going to need to split. I don't think you can capture this point without splitting, unless maybe you like run it down with rush and like go over here, but that seems really suspect because you have no pressure then on this like long angle if they're on Widow or something. So we'll see how it works out, but basically yeah, the whole stage though is nutty long sightlines and like really strange positions. On defense, when you're recontesting the last fight, this is your best friend right here. This room. Come out here, really good sightlines over the whole point, and you have a couple options and you're really close to the safety. And while you might think that you'd want to come out here, it's actually, like, it's a good angle, don't get me wrong, but it's also very predictable. So if they get their hit scan, like, set up over here, they're kind of just going to get rolled with these. So, it's a little challenging to deal with. So, yeah, hopefully that gives a brief idea of how some of these map points play. I know it was kind of long and convoluted, but unfortunately I haven't had that many times. I haven't seen the map in action, and I haven't had time to really refine my thoughts on it. But at least this gives you like a very basic idea of how things look. So I think that, like I said, I think the biggest heroes here are going to be Genji, Hanzo, Ana, and someone like maybe Mercy, Brig, or Lucio. Really any main support, I guess. Or even double flex support like an Ana Zen, but it's a little suspect with divers. But yeah, Genji, Hanzo, Echo, Tracer, Widow, Ashe. Those are probably going to be your main things. Like really long range and very mobile. Tank line, I could see two paths. I could see Sigma, or I could see Ball, Winston, maybe Doomfist. I think Doomfist though might struggle a little too much closing the distance. I think he's a little weaker with that compared to Doomfist and Ball, but we could see. D.Va, I don't think she's really in a great spot right now, but maybe if they did something to make her a little more easy to like approach with her defense matrix and actually apply pressure, I could see teams like having some success with her here because she's pretty brawly and able to like bully a lot of these flankers. So like she could be really strong, for example, for like just like locking down this position, for example. So I don't know. We could see. She might be really good because she's like super mobile. Might not be. But yeah, so yeah, I expect to see these like kind of dive and poke hybrids because if you go like full dive with like Tracer Sombra or Tracer Genji, etc., I think you just get pummeled from these long sight lines. Like there's so much wide open space on this map, even though there's also like a lot of buildings, which is like kind of this interesting dynamic, right? Because there's a lot of cover, but there's also really long sight lines, and like I feel like it's almost easy to forget about these long sight lines because it's like so colorful and so many doorways and flank paths. But the fact is, there are a lot of inaccessible high grounds that are like very difficult to deal with if you don't have poker mobility. And there's a lot of long sight lines that are much longer than you would expect. Like this is pretty long. The sight line from over here. This is like pretty uninterrupted here from the staircase. There's not much cover to do with that. These are long sight lines. C, like don't even get me started on C. You saw that. Huge sight lines onto the point here.
Diving in.
Really long sight lines here. So you have this whole characterization of really long sight lines, really high vertical mobility, or really high verticality, pretty narrow side spaces. So when you like sum it all together, you get a map very similar to, of course, Dorado, which many people have already likened it to, where we see a lot of pretty similar picks to some of the ones I mentioned, like Widow, Hanzo, Genji, Tracer, Ashe, Echo, Pharah, etc. So yeah, I would expect maybe Dorado-esque heroes, but it's also like Dorado, but stretched out. Like, you have much longer, much wider zones here, I would say, than Dorado. And maybe even longer sightlines. Like this is like Dorado C, but wider, which means longer sightlines, because it's like just wider in the middle, not wider platforms. So you have this interesting interaction of like, well, it is like Dorado, but it's also like favors poke even more than Dorado because the sightlines are longer while having the same level of verticality and even more flanking potential, arguably. So yeah, and with that, I'll call this map review a wrap. Thank you for listening.